1992, a year of decision. Will we elect a president who can challenge America to be great again? Or will we simply settle for more of the same? Businesses gone bankrupt, factories closed, 8 million Americans out of work, many families unable to afford basic health care, America near the bottom in spending for education. That's the State of the Union George Bush isn't telling us about. Tom Harkin has the vision to make the American dream possible again for every American. Tom Harkin stands for real Democratic Party values and has the courage to implement bold new solutions, not simply follow the latest opinion poll. And Tom Harkin has the leadership to pull us together and get America back on its feet.
I tell you, as I travel around this country, I feel it. I sense it. There's a hunger in this country, a hunger to turn away from the policies of George Bush, the policies that enable the rich to get richer, force the poor to get poorer, and make the middle class pay for both. It has left us with a legacy of despair and depression and division in our own land. This is not our country. This is not America. This is not our America. Our America is an America of hope and confidence and unity. Our America is an America where people are back at work. Yes, there's a hunger in this country, a hunger to turn away from those policies. And I'll tell you, there's a hunger in the Democratic Party, too. A hunger for a real Democrat to take on George Bush.
The centerpiece of Tom Harkin's presidential campaign is the blueprint to build a new America, a specific plan to spur economic growth, rebuild America's best resources, and put Americans back to work.
I'm the only Democrat in this race who has a specific economic program to put Americans back to work and get this country moving again. I have a 5-point economic program. First of all, get rid of trickle-down economics because it doesn't work. Secondly, let's invest in our infrastructure and build new roads and bridges and mass transportation and high-speed rail and energy systems here in America so we don't have to buy oil from the Mideast any longer. Third, we get the money for that by quit subsidizing Europe and Japan, bring our money home and invest it here in America. Fourth, let's get tough on trade. My goal during my first term as president will be to cut our trade deficit to zero. Every $1 billion in trade deficit is 23,500 jobs. Let's reduce that trade deficit, bring those jobs back to America. And my fifth point is to make sure we have a program that every American man or woman who loses his or her job is retrained for another job.
Imagine a nation that puts in place Tom Harkin's blueprint to build a new America. New investments in roads, bridges, and mass transit, a magnet for jobs and new economic development. Investments in better schools and universities, and in first-rate job training and retraining to meet the needs of a changing workforce.
I was in Dover the other day. A 53-year-old man came up to me, he was in the unemployment line. He said, I've been working at this plant for over 20 years. Now I'm out of a job. So I went down to the local government office to see what kind of training programs were available to me. He said, I'm not old enough to retire and I'm not rich enough to retire. He said, I found out there wasn't anything for me. So here I am, I've been paying taxes all my life. And the one time I need some help, there's no help for me. Well, I'll tell you as president, I'm going to start enacting a program that will give every working man and woman in this country the peace and security of mind of knowing that if they ever lose their job, they will have retraining available for another job here in our own country.
Harkin's blueprint to build a new America also means real commitment, not just lip service, to the health and education of growing numbers of children left behind by the failure of trickle-down economics. There are those who say we can't afford to invest in our future. Tom Harkin says we can't afford not to. A Harkin presidency will set budget priorities straight by cutting billions allocated for deadly weapons whose primary purpose is defending us against a now non-existent Soviet Union, and redirecting the billions we now spend defending Japan and Germany. And finally, Harkin will require millionaires and rich corporations to pay their fair share.
Stopping this trickle-down economics, Get rid of it. Let's start putting the money into your people, put them to work.
Exactly right.
When they're working and they're buying cars and they're buying homes and they're educating their kids, that builds America.
That's exactly right. That's a democratic philosophy.
That's right. It's always been a democratic philosophy.
Right.
Tom Harkin's ideas not only make sense, they'll save money in the long run. Take his health care plan. One of his first priorities is prevention, a simple idea that has become a theme for Harkin in the U.S. Senate and could save us $350 billion a year.
If we take care of people early on, get preventative health care measure out, health education, checkups, things like that. Not only will make us a healthier people, it'll save us a lot of money.
Tom Harkin also has a deep and abiding belief in affordable health care for every American because he's seen what happens to people who don't have health care.
You know who the first presidential candidate was that campaigned for national health insurance? Harry Truman. And what Harry Truman started, I'm going to finish.
Don't underestimate Tom Harkin. He stuck his neck out for what's right for 17 years representing Iowa and Washington, and even before that. As a congressional aide during the Vietnam War, Tom Harkin traveled there and took these pictures of tiger cages where opponents of the Saigon regime were tortured. The government wanted a cover-up, but Harkin refused. It cost him his job, but the tiger cages were finally closed. In 1981, Harkin bucked the tide and opposed Reagan's tax breaks for the rich. In 1991, Harkin sponsored an amendment to begin redirecting billions from the military into education and health care. He even published a book on how to do it. And he led the fight to try to stop the gag rule that would curtail women's right to choose. Other Democrats in the race talked tough on the economy, on health care, on choice. But Tom Harkin spent a lifetime fighting our fights, not just a few months of a presidential campaign. Tom Harkin understands ordinary, hard-working Americans. His education on the issues comes not just from white papers and experts, but from life. Growing up in a two-room house in a family too poor to afford health care or even an extra pair of shoes, flying jets in the Navy for 5 years during the Vietnam conflict, working alongside average Americans in their jobs with an original idea, workdays. Understanding family concerns through 23 years of marriage and raising 2 daughters. Nowhere is Harkin's dedication clearer than in his greatest legislative achievement, the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act.
My brother Frank became deaf at a very early age, like he was 7 or 8 years old. Sent away to a state school for the deaf and dumb. As he told me one time, he said, I may be deaf, but I'm not dumb. I saw all during his life how he was discriminated against. In the job market, I saw how he was discriminated against in travel and just trying to work and live a decent life. I've always said that, if I was ever in a position to do something about it, I would. And when I got in the Senate and became chair of the Disability Policy Subcommittee, I became the chief sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act. What's good about that bill is there's not one nickel of a handout. There's no welfare in it. It just breaks down the barriers, opens the doors of opportunity. And that's what America ought to be about, opportunity, freedom, letting people contribute to our great country.
The real question, can Tom Harkin win? Look at who he is, a fighter for the middle class, a man of courage, a gutsy campaigner who wasn't afraid to take George Bush to the mat, even when Bush's approval ratings were soaring, and won't back down when Bush's handlers turn up the heat in 1992.
I'm here today to tell you that George Herbert Walker Bush has got feet of clay, and I'm going to take a hammer to him.
One recent national poll found Bush's worst enemy would be a populist in the tradition of FDR, Harry Truman, and John F. Kennedy. The news media also recognized Harkin's potential. As columnist Mark Shields put it, he can speak from the gut to Reagan Democrats and other working-class Americans who wondered what happened to democratic values and passions. And on the matter of economic populism, Tom Harkin will drive George Bush bats. Tom Harkin is rolling up his sleeves and getting the crowds cheering with a message of opportunity and optimism that America can once again be the best.
To each generation of Americans, there comes a time of adversity and opportunity. This is our time of adversity. We are being told by Bush and the Republicans that we have to accept a lower lifestyle, that we can't afford to invest here in America. that we can't afford education for all our kids, that we can't afford to have health care for our people. But in that adversity is our opportunity. Our opportunity to be courageous, to once again seize this time to move this country forward. If we stand still, then the American dream will die. I tell you, it is not time to stand still. It is not time to shrink before the onslaught of George Bush and the money and the power and the privilege that they have. Now is the time for us Americans. It's now time for us to stand up and fight back. It's time for us to reclaim our own land. It's time for us to build that new America.